Part 16. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocienu. Chapter 151. The blue blade wind, carrying an unimaginable terrifying aura, penetrated Sun Wei's short body. Sun Wei lowered his head in horror, and his eyes saw his own half-body that had been broken and gushing blood. But the light blade did not stop after piercing Sun Wei's body. This temporarily created space barrier was instantly crossed by the light blade containing destructive energy. With a loud bang, the barrier born in the space crack was destroyed in an instant, and countless barrier fragments fell into the space turbulence. But at the moment when the barrier was shattered, an invisible spiritual power wrapped in a chaotic devouring force penetrated the space-time turbulence and broke out of the air somewhere in the space. On the zombie battlefield, no one saw that a vague transparent beam of light penetrated through the layers of space and directly hit Mewtwo's body. Feeling the mysterious space energy in the body, it was like a pool of water pouring into a clear spring. The corners of Mewtwo's mouth rose slightly. He was also curious about the spatial ability to create a barrier. From the moment he saw Sun Wei use this ability, Mewtwo had already planned to absorb it. He looked up at the darkening sky. Unconsciously, the color of the sky had gradually turned yellow, and dusk occupied the sky. Turning his head to look at the beautiful girl sleeping in his arms, her eyelashes trembling slightly as if she was dreaming a sweet dream, Mewtwo couldn't help but smile slightly. It's almost time to end this symphony called collapse. In front of him, there was an overwhelming tide of terrifying zombies, still dark and boundless. Mewtwo was like a mayfly in the sea surrounded by these zombies. More than 100 surviving awakeners of the trial team stood still unable to hide the shock in their eyes. And at the Yuhei base hundreds of kilometers away, countless human survivors held their breath and looked at the man in the dark at the center of the picture. Mewtwo was seen holding the hilt of the void sword with one hand, and countless silver-white threads surrounded the sword body that was more than 10 feet long, and the icy energy was infused into it. Swish! A gorgeous crystal blue light column shot up into the sky again, and then the icy energy burst out, and the light column froze at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few seconds, an ice column that spread to the sky appeared in front of everyone. Mewtwo held the hilt, and the hideous sword body of the void sword stabbed towards the ground. An indescribable strong wave rippled like water, and the first thing to break was the huge ice column that shot straight into the sky. A violent shattering sound came from the ice column, and then the ice column that had just condensed actually broke into pieces. The huge ice column instantly broke into tiny ice crystals like frost, and fell into the sky. The scattered ice crystals fell on the bodies of countless zombie monsters, and they seemed to have life, spreading and growing rapidly, and in a flash, they froze the zombies into ice men. Even those terrible heretics with huge bodies, flexible bodies, and amazing energy were not spared, and were frozen into ice cubes by these terrifying ice crystals, with only the outlines of their bodies still slightly visible. The ice crystals all over the sky sprinkled like rain and snow in late winter, and even the earth was stained with a layer of frost in a moment. Several miles around Mewtwo, the roars of zombies and monsters all dissipated, leaving only the whistling of cold wind and countless frozen human outlines. At least thousands of zombies were disintegrated in this ice field. At this moment, the ice and snow were in a dead silence. What is this? Everyone's eyes were stunned by this scene. This is beyond the scope of S-level ability, right? In the Yuhei base, Zhang Qinggui's face froze, staring at Mewtwo in the center of the screen for a long time, and then he looked at Wang Deipen and spoke slowly. Wang Deipen had already stood up, staring at the void sword in Mewtwo's hand in the picture without blinking. When he saw the miserable death of the bone dragon, his face had already turned ashen, but when he saw Mewtwo use the method of freezing thousands of miles, he was silent again. There is a sentence he didn't say. This level of power, even he can't easily use it. It's that giant sword. The greed in Wang Daipen's eyes became even worse, and even the anger of the death of his capable subordinates was thrown behind him. If he has the strength of the destruction level, plus the power of the giant sword, who can be his opponent? Boom! In the battlefield full of zombies, just when everyone was shocked by Mu Chiu's horrific means, a loud sound of artillery shells reached their ears, pulling back the shocked hearts of the awakened ones. At the end of the street in the distance, an armored team of more than 1,000 people rushed towards the zombies. In the team, dozens of large modified armored vehicles were loaded with shells, and they fired at the command of Wei Ying. Immediately, countless bullets shot out from the gun barrels in the hands of the law enforcement team members, and the outermost zombies fell to the ground in a bloody mess. The artillery fire was continuous, and the smoke was filled. Everyone could even clearly see the rules of the artillery shells and the continuous sparks, and the red muzzles of the armor-piercing bullets were fired one after another. Its reinforcements, the reinforcements from the base have finally arrived. The awakened people who survived the zombies saw this scene, and immediately showed an extremely happy smile on their faces. A loud sound of breaking ground was heard from the group of corpses, and a huge dark green maggot several meters long rushed out from deep underground, emitting terrifying energy fluctuations. It's just that the maggot's body was broken at this time, and there was a constant spurt of foul blood and disgusting mucus from the broken wound. Even so, the giant maggot is still alive. The huge mutant maggot screamed, and a touch of human fear could be seen from its distorted face. As soon as the mutant maggot rushed out from the ground, it fled in one direction. It was actually trying to escape. Countless zombies along the way were crushed by its huge body, and even the members of the law enforcement team were frightened by the terrifying fluctuations of the maggot and did not dare to approach to stop it. At this moment, the space above the mutant maggot shook, and a white vortex suddenly appeared, and then a white figure flashed by. The blue laser cut through the sky, and a narrow hole was suddenly opened on the top of the mutant maggot's head, and a purple crystal core inside flashed with magnificent light. After the mutant maggot let out a long hissing wail, its huge body finally fell to the ground, and there was no more sound. A man in a white suit with extremely gray hair, holding a blue laser sword, slowly stood on the smooth head of the maggot. The sound of gunfire and the roar of zombies around him continued to echo, but the man looked at the ice-blue restricted area in the center of the zombie tide. This white-haired man was very familiar to everyone. He was the captain of the famous law enforcement team in the Yuhei base, Ji Yufeng, codenamed the White Death God. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 152. Mu Chiu held a hideous-looking void sword and swept across lightly. The silver-white beams of light wrapped around the sword rippled as if traveling through time and space, and the ice blocks frozen by countless zombie monsters around were pierced by the silver-white streak. With a click, countless frozen bodies collapsed and disintegrated at this moment, turning into flying ice flowers in the air. Mu Chiu held Yui in his arms and walked slowly in the center of the corpse tide where the terrifying monsters were most dense, accompanied by ice-blue beams and extremely destructive silver-white streaks. Wherever he passed, countless zombie heretics turned into ice crystals flying in the air. The ice mist dissipated, and the floating ice crystals swept across the broken hair on his forehead until he slowly walked in front of a huge ladybug monster. This ladybug monster named Soul Eater was actually afraid of the extreme coldness emanating from Mu Chiu, and its huge body trembled. Mu Chiu's expression was indifferent, and he said to the ladybug, "Who are you?" He could feel that the aura that really attracted him was not from this S-level soul-eating ladybug. In other words, this soul-eating insect only had a hint of familiar aura on it that Mu Chiu felt. Standing quietly in front of the soul-eating ladybug that was dozens of times larger than him, Mu Chiu knew that the existence could hear his words. As expected, the behemoth in front of him moved immediately when Mu Chiu opened his mouth. The originally scarlet pupils of the soul-eating ladybug's compound eyes suddenly became hollow and deep. Then, in the depths of the deep pupils, a dark pink light emerged, and the pattern of butterfly wings could be vaguely seen from it. Familiar mental fluctuations came out from it, and this breath was exactly the same as what Miu felt at the beginning, and then a gentle voice came into Miu's mind. Dire knows that brother will never forget me. Suddenly, a giggle of laughter came from the mental fluctuations. We will be together again soon, soon. The girl's voice stopped at this moment, and the mental fluctuations that Miu felt familiar with also quickly dissipated at this moment. The pair of compound eyes of the soul-eating ladybug turned into a bloody scarlet appearance again, but this time the ladybug's body began to tremble violently, and the humanized pupils were filled with fear. Miu sensed something, and an ice shield condensed in front of him to wrap him ennui. The body of the soul-eating ladybug began to swell rapidly as if it was inflated, and at the same time, the body began to release strong mental fluctuations uncontrollably. Finally, at a certain point, the energy emitted from the soul-eating ladybug reached its peak. The huge body of the soul-eating ladybug exploded, and countless gorgeous butterflies flew out of the ladybug's body. The colorful butterfly wings flapped, and clusters of dark red pollen drifted into the air. After the surrounding zombie monsters came into contact with the dark red powder, the violent intent in their eyes became more intense, and they began to bite the monsters next to them crazily. As these colorful butterflies with gorgeous and beautiful appearances flew all the way, the awakened humans and law enforcement teams also inhaled these strange dust. The next second, these humans who were originally clear-minded suddenly had bloodshot eyes and bulging veins, and used their superpowers to attack their companions around them fearlessly. Seeing this, Wei Ying immediately ordered the team members to cover their mouths and noses and control the crazy companions around them. But those dark red pollens seemed to need no medium. Even if they came into contact with the surface of human zombies, they could make them so violent that they lost their minds and turned into terrifying monsters that would only destroy everything around them. More and more human zombies were infected by these strange powders. The battlefield was no longer a melee between humans and zombies, but a fight between all living things. The development of the situation was beyond the expectations of Ji Yufeng and Wei Ying. They tried to eliminate the gorgeous butterflies flying in the air, but the number of those butterflies was too large. Eliminating a limited number of butterflies was of no help compared to the speed of pollen spread. Ji Yufeng suddenly turned his head and looked at Wei Ying and said, "Use that." Wei Ying hesitated for a moment, but looking at the law enforcement team members fighting each other around him, he finally nodded. He took out a palm-sized transparent crystal from his chest pocket, and the supernatural power surged in his hand, and a stream of energy was immediately poured into it. With the injection of supernatural energy, the inside of the transparent crystal emitted a dazzling light, and the whole crystal floated into the air. Miu seemed to sense something, and stared at the transparent crystal in Wei Ying's hand. At the same time, in a well-equipped medical room in Yuhei Base, a girl in a white dress was lying flat on the bed, with all kinds of life-sustaining medical equipment inserted into her body. The most eye-catching thing was the girl's waist-length silver-white hair. Suddenly, an amazing energy surged, and a dazzling white light burst out from the girl's body, and a look of pain appeared on the girl's delicate face. On the instrument dial next to it, a series of data values continued to rise, until a value was reached, and the red siren in the room hummed. A nurse in a white coat hurriedly opened the door, saw the abnormality of the girl on the bed, and hurriedly took out the communicator on her waist and reported. "Meow meow, Meow Meow's power has been used." In the endless tide of corpses, countless zombies and humans had red eyes, fighting each other irrationally without distinguishing between enemies and friends. In an instant, a dazzling crystal rose from the tide of corpses. The next moment, the crystal suddenly dissipated into a silver-white light curtain, attracting everyone's attention. The light curtain slowly condensed, and finally formed an angel phantom with 6 wings on its back, a golden halo on its head, and a holy glow on its body. The 6-winged angel closed his eyes, crossed his hands in front of his chest, his face was full of compassion, his temperament was pure and flawless, and he appeared in front of the world with a brilliant light. Immediately, the six-winged angel began to emit a holy light that was even stronger than before, but this light wave was extremely soft and warm, and it did not seem to be dazzling or uncomfortable at all. Only Miu stood on the ground, looking up at the angel phantom that suddenly appeared in the sky. Feeling the holy light shining like the sun on the earth, Miu felt an inexplicable discomfort in his heart, and even the fire demon in his body began to roar violently. It seemed that it was extremely disgusted with the light emitted by the angel. What was surprising was that when this soft holy light shone on the bodies of those crazy humans, those humans originally irrational eyes gradually became clear, and the expressions on their faces changed from the violent killing just now to sincere repentance. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 153. The soft light curtain spread to the earth like the spring rain, and the light with warm and holy breath shone on this land. The twilight of the dusk suddenly became as bright as day. The redness in the eyes of the crazy human awakeners gradually faded after being exposed to the white light. And those zombie heretics who had been infected for a long time, after their bodies came into contact with this seemingly soft light, their bodies began to rot and evaporate rapidly. Roar. The painful roars that came one after another resounded throughout the venue. The bodies of those low-level zombies evaporated rapidly in just a few seconds, and the dark red blood splashed and evaporated, turning into a white dry skeleton in an instant. Even those A-level zombies became stiff, the flesh on the surface rotted and blurred, and they uttered a painful low groan. As if seeing a natural enemy, there was a touch of fear in the depths of their pupils. And the countless strange butterflies that were originally flying in the air also disappeared under the illumination of this light. This is. The awakened people were stunned for a moment, with their companions and zombie monsters' broken limbs beside them, and they themselves fell in a pool of blood. They were not yet wise, but they noticed the holy light radiating from above, warm and gentle. Many awakened people looked up and saw a huge shadow of a six-winged angel in the light curtain in the sky. The six-winged angel embraced his arms, wearing a light veil, with a golden halo on his head, and exuding an extremely holy light. Although the face was blurry, everyone vaguely saw the appearance of the person they missed. The eyes of the humans on the ground were moved, and the excited ones regarded it as a miracle, and knelt down with flushed faces. But in just a few seconds, the huge shadow of the six-winged angel in the sky turned into white particles and dissipated in the wind. At the same time, in another city, in the medical building called Yuhei Base, red sirens sounded. Surrounded by a dozen medical staff in white coats, a bed was pushed by several medical staff with anxious faces. On the bed, there was a girl in a white dress, with all kinds of strange instruments inserted into her body. The breathing tube around her mouth was full of white mist, and her forehead was even soaked with fine cold sweat. What was even more strange was that the girl's body was emitting a soft white light, and as the light was released, the expression on the girl's face became more and more painful. Finally, after a while, the light emitted from the girl's body gradually dimmed, and the girl's breathing on the bed became rapid. Several medical staff anxiously pushed the girl into an operating room. With a bang, the door closed tightly, and the sign in front of the door also turned into a frightening red. After a while, in front of the door of the medical room, a woman in uniform picked up the communicator in her hand. Miao's condition has been temporarily stabilized. Now the medical team is still checking Miao's physical data. Xiao Hanyan's cold voice came from the other side of the communicator. I know, tell the medical team to pay attention to Miao's condition in time, and send more people to protect her. Yes. As the shadow of the six-winged angel covering the sky disappeared, the light curtain behind it gradually dimmed and finally disappeared in the air. Everyone suddenly woke up completely, and everything that just happened seemed like a beautiful dream. At this moment, most of the tens of thousands of terrifying zombies had already been wiped out. The ground was full of broken limbs wrapped in ice, and white bones evaporated under the light curtain. The remaining scattered zombies were either fleeing frantically or lying on the ground with their limbs rotten and stiff. The pale yellow of dusk spread again on the edge of the sky, which really meant dusk and sunset, and also made many besieged awakeners feel relieved. At this moment, a figure attracted the attention of everyone present, including the law enforcement team. A man in a black windbreaker slowly stepped out from the depths of the retreating corpse tide. His windbreaker fluttered, and he held a ferocious sword that was more than a foot long, which was terrifying. It was surrounded by crystal blue ice crystals and silver white silk. In the man's arms, he was holding a beautiful pink-haired girl. As the man walked slowly, the void sword in his hand also turned into stars and dissipated in the air, and then all merged into the white void that appeared in front of the girl's chest. At this moment, countless eyes full of horror and admiration gathered on the man. It was because of Mewtwo's existence today that they were able to turn the tide and reverse the situation in one fell swoop. Mewtwo alone annihilated thousands of zombie heretics, including S-level monsters. His powerful ability completely impressed everyone, and they looked at Mewtwo with admiration and respect without concealment. Lord Bingjun is mighty. Suddenly, a cheer of admiration came from the crowd, and then more people around joined in. The overlapping shouts finally merged into 4 words. Jade Si Bingjun. Jade Si Bingjun. In the Yuhei base hundreds of kilometers away, the survivors on the street also cheered Mewtwo's name. They were also convinced of Mewtwo's strength. In the meeting room of the central building, more than a dozen high-level figures of the base also looked at the picture. Mewtwo walked out calmly with a calm face and no scars on his body. It seems that we still underestimated Bingjun's strength. He suppressed the entire zombie tide with his own strength. I admire him, I admire him. Zhang Qinggui narrowed his eyes and looked at Mewtwo's figure in the picture with a smile on his face, but he remembered something in his heart. Could it be you? The savior of the prophecy. Xiao Hanyan was also shocked. She did not expect Mewtwo's strength to be so terrifying. He was easily defeated by several S-level monsters. But Xiao Hanyan glanced in the direction of Wang Daipen. She felt that the ability of the Skull Dragon was quite familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere. A guess that was closer to the fact emerged in her mind. Among the shouting crowd, 3 students also looked at Mewtwo's slender figure with admiration. This is their teacher. Among the 3, Lin Feng, who was wearing goggles, was the most excited. Looking at Mewtwo, who was respected and praised by everyone, his eyes were extremely envious. His dream was to become a hero respected and admired by everyone like a teacher. Clenching his fists, Lin Feng's thoughts in his heart became more and more firm. Mewtwo, who was cheered and praised by everyone, had a calm and indifferent expression, as if there was no ripple at all. He just looked up at the direction of the sunset, with an inexplicable look in his eyes, and no one knew what he was thinking. Is it really over? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 154. King Fei. A familiar red-robed figure appeared in front of Lu Qingfei. The latter showed a look of horror on her face, and took several steps back in disbelief. Su Feng, how is it possible, you are not? The red-robed man in front of her was Su Feng, the fiancé of Lu Qingfei, who should have died in the ruins of Lannan City long ago. Su Feng looked gentle and affectionately at Lu Qingfei. Qingfei. The next second, Su Feng's face suddenly became hideous and pale. The horrible face and the deep red robe that was still dripping with blood made him look like a bloodthirsty vampire. A pair of sharp fangs opened in his mouth, glaring. Lu Qingfei, why didn't you save me? Su Feng's body suddenly began to break inch by inch, and the bloody holes could not stop flowing out scarlet blood. Why didn't you save me? We could have lived a wonderful life together, why didn't you stay with me? Have you forgotten the agreement between us? The man's hoarse and angry voice reached Lu Qingfei's ears. No, don't come over. Lu Qingfei retreated in fear, squatted weakly, and buried her head deeply. The huge change of her husband has always been an indelible shadow in her heart, and it is also a memory she has never wanted to recall. The man's roar gradually faded away in Lu Qingfei's ears, and the whole dark space fell into a dull silence. Qingfei. A hoarse old voice suddenly came, and the familiar voice made Lu Qingfei look up subconsciously. I saw an old man with the vicissitudes of life and grey hair appear at Lu Qingfei's feet. The grey head was full of blurred blood, and the originally kind face was distorted by extreme pain at this moment. The old man's eyes were wide open, as if he had encountered something terrifying before his death, and not far from his broken head was his blood-stained body. Qingfei, save me. Professor Lin. The familiar relatives appeared in front of her with their heads and bodies separated. Lu Qingfei finally couldn't hold on and knelt on the ground in grief. But the next moment, she found that her hands were covered with blood. When she came to her senses, the ground was already covered with flowing blood. Lu Qingfei. The low moaning sound like a ghost asking for life came from behind her. Lu Qingfei hurriedly turned her head, but found that a river full of blood had appeared behind her at some point. On the river, miserable souls were shedding blood and tears, running towards her with their fangs and claws bared. Countless bloody hands stretched out to her from the endless sea of blood, and what was even clearer was the resentment and hatred on the faces of these souls. Don't come over here. Lu Qingfei screamed and woke up from the bed. In the dim room, the face of this intellectual urban beauty had already become haggard, and her eyes were bloodshot. The first thing Lu Qingfei did after waking up was to curl up the quilt into a ball, trembling all over and curled up in the corner. Her eyes showed fear and fatigue, and her pale and cracked lips murmured. It's not me, it's not me. Lu Qingfei. Suddenly, a deep fog spread out of the room, and Lu Qingfei returned to the deep space in her dream. A hoarse and bewitching voice came from my ear. Don't you understand? Your teacher died at the hands of Yuhei's people, and even your husband was forced to death by Yuhei base, you can't save anyone. Lu Qingfei's eyes were full of bloodshot, her head was buried deep under her knees, her hands covered her head, and her voice trembled. Why did you choose me? This is your fate, you can't escape. Joining us is your final destination. In the dark and deep space, Lu Qingfei curled up in a corner, and a mysterious figure in a purple robe slowly emerged behind her. The twilight of dusk reflected the earth, adding a touch of popularity to the entire empty city ruins. In the city, zombie monsters staggered and crawled from time to time, with hoarse low moans in their throats. The closer it got to night, the more active these bloodthirsty monsters became. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, shaking the surrounding rubble and gravel to splash. A group of zombies around were attracted by the loud noise and rushed towards a certain direction. A series of thunderous booms resounded throughout the earth, and tall buildings collapsed in the distance. Roar! The heavy sound of the collapsed buildings awakened the entire sleeping city, and countless hungry zombie monsters twisted their bodies and rushed towards the same direction. The next moment, countless shells and lasers spewing sparks and smoke swept from a distance like a storm. The hot lasers, accompanied by huge artillery with amazing destructive power, instantly killed hundreds of zombies into slag. A huge spider rushed out from the ground, with a majestic and dangerous aura on its body, and its limbs were even sharper and flashing with cold light. The surrounding zombie monsters were frightened by the terrifying pressure when the spider appeared, and they did not dare to take a step forward. Although the giant spider's body was huge, its movements were surprisingly flexible. Its limbs were slightly bent, and it appeared hundreds of meters away in a leap. The smoke and dust were everywhere. Just as the giant spider was about to spit out venom to attack, an equally huge white shadow rushed towards them from the center of the smoke. The light wave emerged, and a tall mechanical armor flew out of the smoke. The mobile device behind it was still spewing high-speed airflow. This mechanical armor with a metallic luster was several stories high, with artillery devices filled in the joints, and a huge steel knife on the mechanical arm. Once the jet device under its feet was activated, the huge mechanical armor was even several times faster than the giant spider. The steel giant knife swung down suddenly, and the terrifying giant spider had no time to react. In an instant, its head and body were separated. The white mechanical armor inserted the giant blade in its hand back to its waist, and the blue reaction core on its chest flashed with energy. At this time, dozens of equally huge mechanical armors behind it flew out of the collapsed house, holding laser guns in their hands. In contrast, the surface paint of these mechanical armors is gray-black, and the device circuits on them are obviously not as fine as those of the white armor. How long will it take to reach Yuhei base? A man's voice suddenly came from the white armor. The radar shows that it is still dozens of kilometers away from Yuhei base. A mechanical voice replied, "Do you plan the shortest route?" The man in the white armor said sternly without any hesitation. "No, just rush over. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 155. The warm sunlight shines through the clouds into the human survivor base called Yuhei, adding a touch of vitality to many old and dusty buildings. Human survivors of all kinds stroll in the city streets surrounded by high walls, wearing tattered clothes, with numb or hurried faces. Even if the sun shines on the faces of numb people, they still can't arouse their yearning for life. They live a miserable life of eating one meal a day and not the next meal every day on relief food. They have long accepted their fate. And those hurried and tired people look like humans because they have to rely on some physical work in exchange for some meager rewards. They are like animals kept in cages. All they can see all day is the four corners of the sky within the base walls. The warm beams of light shine through the glass of a two-story villa in the center of the base and slant into the interior of the villa. In the kitchen on the first floor of the villa, a straight and slender man's back stands in front of the chopping board. The man was wearing an apron around his waist, with a faint smile on his face, carefully handling the food in his hands. TNLAI Novel Network. Beside the man, there was a delicate girl with pink ponytails, kneading glutinous rice without blinking, and then filling it with meat floss, ham, and other ingredients, wrapped with a layer of seaweed, and a brand new rice ball was ready. "Hey, Miu-Chiu." Just then, a crisp and somewhat childish female voice sounded. I saw a cute girl in a white dress appear behind Miu-Chiu at some point, with a head of soft silver-white long hair, which was now lazily hanging on Miu-Chiu's neck like a sloth. "I'm so hungry, it's not ready yet." The girl poked her head out with some curiosity, and her little mouth was pouting so much that she could hang an oil bottle. Miu-Chiu kept working on a bowl of egg drop soup, and chuckled. "It'll be ready soon." Yi-Chi next to him had just wrapped a rice ball, and held it in front of Miu-Chiu as if to ask for credit, raised her head slightly, and her eyes were deep. Miu-Chiu's face was gentle, and she always had a smile like the spring breeze. No one who saw the scene could associate it with the arrogant and domineering Yan Shura or Yu Hai Bingjun who suppressed the tide of tens of thousands of corpses with his own strength. The simple breakfast was quickly prepared, and the rising aroma instantly spread throughout the room. Banana muffins, a few rice balls, meat floss sandwiches, sweet cream vegetable salad, attractive grape egg tarts. Miu-Chiu was quite particular about food. Since he became a human, he has been trying to continue his high-quality life. But such a simple breakfast is the exquisite life that countless survivors and awakeners outside dream of. Miu-Chiu placed a plate of vegetable salad in front of the girl in the white dress, and the girl's clear eyes immediately flashed with little stars. The girl was about to pick up the spoon on the table, but the next moment something strange happened. The girl's fair little hand actually passed the iron spoon on the table out of thin air, but the girl seemed to be unaware of it, and pretended to open her mouth and swallow. Seeing this scene, Miuccio narrowed his eyes slightly. Only by looking carefully can you notice that the girl's body radiates a circle of transparent light beams, making her look unreal like a phantom. The girl in the white dress with clear eyes in front of him is Miao Miao, one of the three guardians of Yuhei Base, the destructive power held in Xiao Hanyan's hand. Since the conversation with the girl that day, the girl named Miao Miao found that Miuccio could see her figure, so she often appeared in front of Miuccio, pestering Miuccio to play with her. And Miuccio could also feel that the Miao Miao in front of him was not like a real person, but more like a spirit composed of different energy. Miuccio suddenly recalled the six-winged angel phantom that appeared in the corpse tide that day and covered the sky. Presumably that was Miao Miao's ability. The strange light curtain shone down, as if it was the holy light that purified the world. Countless zombie heretics all decayed and evaporated, turning into white corpses. That was the terrifying ability to absolutely restrain the evil forces like zombies. Even Miuccio smelled a hint of danger the moment the beam of light shone down. Has Miao Miao stayed in this base for a long time? Miuccio sat opposite Miao Miao and asked with his chin propped up indifferently. The girl nodded with her mouth puffed. Miao Miao has lived here for a long time, and no one talks, it's really boring here. Miuccio knew that the here in Miao Miao's mouth was the Yuhei base. Just like a bound spirit, Miao Miao's spirit was imprisoned in the walled Yuhei base, and her body should be somewhere in the Yuhei base. The six-winged angel that appeared in the zombie battlefield that day should be only a part of the girl's ability. Hey, Miuccio, what are we going to play later? Miao Miao was still feasting on the food, and suddenly raised her head, blinking her clear eyes, and her little face was full of expectation. Miao Miao's existence is quite special, and ordinary humans can hardly detect her existence. These days, Miuccio has nothing to do, and often hangs out with the girl, which makes the girl feel the long-lost happiness, and Miuccio also learns many secrets in the base. Not today, I have to go out to do something later. Miuccio smiled and shook his head. The girl's face visibly fell, and she lay on the table, looking listless. As a spirit, Miao Miao wandered around the base like a ghost, but no one could keep her company. This little girl must have been lonely for a long time to develop such a chatterbox character. She pretended to eat just now just to make herself behave more like a human, but she didn't know that Miuccio and Yui in front of her were no longer human. After experiencing multiple evolutions, Miuccio was no longer an ordinary zombie king, and Yui was not in the category of humans in many senses. In response to the girl's loss, Miuccio smiled lightly and touched Miao Miao's head, but his palm penetrated the girl's illusory spirit at the moment of contact. Miuccio triggered a trace of devouring power, and the chaotic devouring breath was added to the palm, covering the light radiating from the girl, and Miuccio also touched the girl's illusory spirit. Be good, I'll be back soon. Miuccio turned to look at Yui again. The girl was still cute and quiet. She held a rice ball in her hands and ate it in small bites, looking at Miuccio from time to time. Miuccio's lips curled up. Yui was always so reassuring. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 156. In a bar somewhere in the Yuhei base, a strong man covered in muscles stood in front of Wang Daipen. The strong man was shirtless, with a bronze-like complexion on his strong chest muscles and deltoid muscles. His thick arms had bulging veins and protruding blood vessels, but there was a thin layer of cold sweat on his forehead. The former casually picked up a cigarette, flicked the lighter, and puffed out smoke. Wang Deipen held a cigarette in his mouth and unbuttoned his robe. His dark body looked thin and frail, but there was a tattoo of a rising red dragon on his back. As time passed, the strong man finally lost his temper and roared, swinging his fist with bulging veins and hitting Wang Deipen. Wang Deipen puffed out smoke, still looking calm and unhurried, tilting his head just in time to avoid the strong man's punch. The next second, Wang Deipen quickly bent down and kicked the strong man in the lower body with a sweeping kick. The latter lost his balance and fell, but Wang Deipen's punch came like lightning. Only a few after images of the swift and fierce fist could be seen vaguely, but the fist was aimed at the key points, as if the target was not a human being, but an ordinary sandbag punching bag. The strong man began to howl in agony, but as the offensive continued, the screams of the strong man also became fainter. Wang Deipen threw down the cigarette butt in his hand and took the towel handed by his subordinate. During the entire process, Wang Deipen did not use any superpowers. Wang Deipen smiled at the bruised man on the ground and said, "Yes, I'll give it to you." A blue crystal core was thrown out and landed on the ground. The face of the man beside him was already covered with blood, his eyes turned white, and he passed away. Wang Deipen lay on the sofa nearby and asked his men, "Have you found any trace of Sun Wei?" "Boss, Mr. Sun has never taken the initiative to contact us, and the locator on his body cannot send out a signal." "It is very possible. His gangster didn't say the rest." In the apocalypse, such a situation would basically be a death sentence. Wang Deipen was still playing with the lighter in his hand. When he heard these words, a ball of flame burst out from his palm. With a boom sound, the lighter exploded instantly. "Mu Qiu, I underestimate you." Wang Deipen groaned, and he still vividly remembered Mu Qiu's performance in the Tide of Corpses. Wang Deipen also didn't expect that Mu Qiu's strength was so terrifying. He suppressed the entire zombie wave by one person, and finally calmly counterattacked under the encirclement and suppression of several S-class people. Mu Qiu's strength far exceeded his expectations. "It seems that the Dragon Society, have been in bad luck recently." Wang Deipen almost said this through gritted teeth. First, Shadow was killed by Shura from the Yanjai dynasty. Sun Wei and Bone Dragon were killed by him while encircling Mu Qiu. Recently, mysterious killers have appeared frequently to assassinate the awakened members of the Shenlong Society. It can be said that most of the backbone of the Shenlong Society has been lost, which is really a serious injury. "Did you find out the information about the woman named Yuki?" The gangster next to him replied. "It seems that Chi-Chi was also picked up by Mu Qiu in the ruins. The specific origin is unknown. The ability is to condense a special weapon called the Void Sword that doubles the energy of the holder. There are no obvious side effects yet." A flash of greed flashed in Wang Deipen's eyes, the great sword of the Void. He had a vague hunch that if he could obtain the Void Sword, then this base would no longer be able to restrain him. "Boss, do you need our people to dispatch?" The subordinate reached forward with his empty hand and made a grabbing movement. Wang Deipen frowned slightly. "No need, first observe the movements of the girl named Chi-Chi." The war was coming, and he didn't want to have any trouble with Xiao Hanyan at this critical moment. Although he has a cruel and arrogant personality, he is not a brainless lunatic. In the second-floor villa, Chi-Chi sat quietly on the sofa, slurping the rice balls in his mouth, and quietly flipping through a comic magazine. Next to her, a girl in a white dress was lying on the sofa boredly, her silky silver hair hanging down. It had been half a day since Mu Qiu went out, while Chi-Chi stayed in the house to accompany Meow Meow. "Sister Chi-Chi, the song you sing is very nice. Can you sing another one for me?" Meow Meow turned to look at Chi-Chi. It was Chi-Chi's singing that attracted her attention at first. Hearing this, Chi-Chi slowly shook his head. "Qiu, you're not here." Mu Qiu was not here, and she had no interest in singing. After being rejected, Meow Meow was not angry. After all, At least there was someone who could chat with her now. As soon as I thought about it, another magazine on the table floated open. With someone to accompany me, I can now read magazines that I found boring before. Time flies. Suddenly, Meow Meow seemed to sense something and suddenly raised her head and looked in a certain direction in the room. I saw a tiny fly flying in through the window at some point. The wings vibrated, and the moment it flew to the ground, the fly turned into a strange man wearing a black robe and a hood. If there is a law enforcement team here, they will definitely notice that this dress is the classic dress of the heterogeneous religion. As soon as the black-robed man appeared, he appeared a few hundred meters behind Yui's sofa, but Yui was still flipping through a magazine, looking unaware. In the sight of the black-robed man, he could only see Yui's back sitting quietly on the sofa. The black-robed man exhaled lightly, with a sarcastic snicker on his face. After all, she was still a young girl, without any defensive psychology. The black-robed man's footsteps were in the air, almost without any sound, and he slowly approached Yui silently, with a smile on his face that his evil plan had succeeded. The ability to make the awakened person's strength soar, the heterogeneous religion also coveted it. On the other side of the sofa, Meow Meow, in the spirit state, looked at the man's strange behavior with a confused face. The black-robed man tiptoed towards the sofa, stretched out his hands and was about to take Yui away. But the next second, a group of black shadows suddenly flowed on the ground in front of the black-robed man. The black shadow rose up like ink, and turned into a ninja in black clothes. The black-clothed ninja suddenly appeared in front of him. The black-robed man's pupils were horrified, and he opened his mouth and was about to scream. But countless long black hands stretched out from the shadows behind the black-robed man, covering the black-robed man's mouth and nose, making him unable to make a sound. The black hands wrapped around the black-robed man's body, and under the man's terrified eyes, pulled him into the bottomless shadow world. The figure of the black-clothed ninja also dived into the ground. Meow Meow, who witnessed the whole process. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 157. Where is this place? The black-robed man was pulled into the shadows behind him by countless black arms, and in the blink of an eye he found himself in a dark red space. Everywhere he looked was dead silent. The black-robed man looked around, sweating profusely, his eyes full of horror. With a light step, the black-robed man actually floated into the air, while the dark red space around him was still terrifyingly quiet. A bone-chilling coldness struck his heart, and suddenly, the black-robed man seemed to have sensed something, and quickly turned his head to look in one direction. Somewhere in the dark space, a pair of scarlet eyes suddenly opened, with an unconcealed boiling murderous intent in his eyes. As the black shadow continued to expand, it eventually turned into a giant black dog, with a crisp sound of grinding teeth in its mouth, and a pair of bloodthirsty eyes stared at the black-robed man. The man in black robe stepped back subconsciously, but he stumbled and bumped into something. He looked back in a hurry. He found that a black leopard man with a sturdy figure and scarlet eyes had stood behind him at some point. Then, the man in black robe found that countless pairs of scarlet bloodthirsty eyes opened in the dark red space around him, which looked like hell. Then, groups of inky black shadows emerged from all directions, and finally transformed into tall figures that were as black as ink and exuded a terrifying aura. Huge mutant monsters, dark orcs with human faces and beast bodies, and black ninjas wearing ninja costumes. After these countless strange black figures emerged, they instantly surrounded the man in black robe. The faces of these black monsters showed no expression, but their steps were surprisingly consistent, and they all slowly moved towards the direction of the black-robed man. No, don't. The black-robed man's pupils shook, but he was surrounded and had no way to escape. In an instant, countless black monsters devoured him. Countless black shadows scattered away, and this dark red shadow kingdom fell into silence again, Almost at the moment when the black-robed man stepped into the villa, Mu Chiu, who was walking on the street, noticed this uninvited guest. But Mu Chiu smiled. It seems that the Black Shadow Kingdom has a new guest. Since showing the powerful ability of Yue, Mu Chiu knew that it would attract the attention of many people. Yue had already been controlled by countless loyal guards of the Shadow Kingdom. Even S-level characters who broke into the forbidden area would be surrounded and devoured by countless evolved Black Shadow soldiers. He could even move to Yue's side instantly through the passage of the Shadow Kingdom. It was somewhat similar to Ji Yufeng's spatial movement, thanks to the insights gained after swallowing the dwarf old man's spatial barrier ability. Walking on the sparsely populated street, Mu Chiu could already feel that the atmosphere in the base was obviously much more tense. The pedestrians on the road were in a hurry, each with their own thoughts, and the occasional whispers were all complaints about life and fate. "Hey, have you heard that the white-clothed killer who specializes in killing awakened people in the base has been acting more and more frequently recently, and has even started to attack ordinary people? Are the law enforcement teams in the base eating free meals? Haven't caught him yet. The white-clothed killer seems to be very powerful. Several people in the law enforcement team have died in his hands during the arrest. I saw it at the scene once. The death, his. It's better to go out less recently. It's a troubled time. This damn world." There were two survivors beside him who walked away during the conversation. Although their voices were low, they were all heard by Mu Chiu. "White-clothed killer." Mu Chiu secretly smacked his lips a few times, indicating that he quite agreed. Time is troublesome, fighting and killing are not good." While he was secretly thinking, Mu Chiu had already arrived at the destination of the strip, the training base after the transformation of Yuhei base. After a few days, the original stadium has been rebuilt again, and the grass track has been cleared. The original structure can no longer be seen, but it really looks like a training base. At this time, there are already hundreds of awakened figures standing in the stadium, but this number is several times less than when the trial started a few days ago. The remaining awakened people have all died in the tide of corpses full of monsters. Most of them are less than 15 years old. This is the cruelest reality of the end of the world. As Mu Chiu slowly stepped into the field, countless eyes also gathered on him. Unlike the last time, this time everyone looked at Mu Chiu with incomparable respect and admiration. Yuhei Bingjun. Everyone in the base witnessed that he was able to resist the deadly zombie tide composed of tens of thousands of high-level zombies with his own strength. Mu Chiu's reputation spread throughout the Yuhei base overnight, even overshadowing Ji Yufeng, the White Death God. No one dared to ignore this young man who had just entered the Yuhei base and became famous. Strength is the only criterion for measuring power. The awakened people around consciously made way for Mu Chiu, and he walked to the front of the crowd. 3 students also came here early, and greeted Mu Chiu happily the moment they saw him. They were all impressed by Mu Chiu's invincibility in the zombie tide. They were also proud of Mu Chiu's reputation. Among them, Lin Feng was the most excited. Later, he begged Mu Chiu to teach him the skills to become stronger. Standing in the front were members of the law enforcement team in black uniforms, including Wei Ying. The law enforcement team is one of the few positions in the Yuhei base. Even the most ordinary guards are treated much better than ordinary people. The guards are more for ordinary people in the base who have not awakened their superpowers. And those awakened people who are not strong enough to join the law enforcement team under Ji Yufeng but are dissatisfied with the treatment of the guards will choose to form their own search team for exploration. However, the safety of the search team is not guaranteed, and the resources allocated are also limited. It can be said that searching outside is more like a double-edged sword for the awakened people in the base. Searching for resources is also accompanied by life-threatening. So countless survivors are trying their best to join the orthodox law enforcement team. Dozens of law enforcement teams surrounded a white figure, and even from a distance, one could sense the arrogant aura emanating from him that kept strangers away. It was Xiao Hanyan, one of the 3 leaders of the Yuhei base, known as the Iceberg Jade Girl. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 158. Today, Xiao Hanyan was wearing a modified white military uniform. The tight top highlighted her perfect figure, her full chest was about to burst out, and her snow-white goose neck was raised. She looked like a cold and elegant lady. The moment Mu Qiu appeared, Xiao Hanyan looked in the direction of Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu's performance in the zombie tide a few days ago also shocked her. She didn't expect that Mu Qiu had grown to this point in just a few months. Xiao Hanyan knew that ordinary people would find it difficult to reach this level in a short period of time even if they were extremely talented. But Xiao Hanyan didn't care about this. After all, everyone has their own secrets in their hearts, and there are too many people with ulterior motives in the Yuhei base. They just live together as human beings in this gathering place full of order. Xiao Hanyan raised her goose neck slightly, nodded and greeted Mu Qiu, and the latter smiled as a return gift. Then, Xiao Hanyan looked around at the crowd. Many human awakeners below were intimidated by her aura, and their throats choked and they stopped talking. Xiao Hanyan slowly said, "Now standing in the field, those who survived, congratulations on successfully passing the test of this awakener trial. Unlike before, the final result of this awakener test is very simple. As long as you survive, you have passed the test." Wei Ying stepped forward and said, "All the awakeners who survived can obtain the qualification to select equipment below B level in the exchange office. Among them, according to the energy crystal cores obtained, the top 5 teams can apply to join the law enforcement team, and the top 3 teams have the permission to select equipment below S level in the exchange office." All the awakeners who participated in the trial showed joy on their faces, and some even jumped up excitedly. There are only a dozen teams that have survived to this day, which means that almost half of them can be lucky enough to join the law enforcement team with generous treatment, and the rest can also go to the law enforcement team to select their favorite high-tech equipment. It can be said that the starting point of these children is several times higher than those wild awakeners, and the resources they can obtain are also within the reach of ordinary awakeners. Lin Feng and the other 2 also smiled. They killed the most zombies and undoubtedly won the first place. In addition to joy, the awakened people around them all looked at Lin Feng and the other 2 with envy. The performance of the 3 has undoubtedly entered the eyes of the top leaders of the base. Joining the law enforcement team is a matter of course. Next, there will be more recruitment and more resources from multiple forces. For awakened people with talent and potential, the base has always been generous in cultivating them. What's more, they have Mu Qiu, the Ice King of Yuhei, as their backer, so their future is naturally bright. Wei Ying said again, "The mentors of the corresponding teams will also receive corresponding rewards. The teachers of the top 5 teams can also apply to join the law enforcement team." This news made the eyes of several awakened mentors brighten. They had applied to join the law enforcement team before, but they were rejected for various reasons. Xiao Hanyan looked at Mu Qiu, who was in front of the crowd and looked relaxed, and said, "Mu Qiu's contribution to the battle against the zombie tide is remarkable, and everyone has witnessed his strong strength." The Ice Queen of Yuhei suddenly looked at Mu Qiu, raised her eyebrows slightly, and said seriously, "Yuhei base intends to set up a hunting team specifically for high-level heretics. Now I formally invite Mu Qiu to be the captain of the hunting team. What do you think?" As soon as these words came out, the whole audience was shocked. The hunting team is a new type of team independent of the law enforcement team and the search team, and its position is on par with Ji Yufeng. And anyone with a discerning eye can see that Xiao Hanyan's move is to recruit Mu Qiu to join the core team of the Yuhei base's senior management. Everyone present cast their eyes on Mu Qiu. Now, Mu Qiu only needs a nod, and the power cake of Yuhei base will be divided by him. But then, something unexpected happened to everyone. Mu spread his hands calmly, but what he said was unexpected. "Thank you for the organization's kindness, but I am used to being idle, and I am afraid I can't accept systematic control." Mu is not a fool. If he really joins the hunting team, he will be working for others in vain. He has no leisure to help others. In fact, if it weren't for the strange voice in his mind that day, in order to find out the reason, Mu would not have come forward to suppress the corpse tide. He has always done things that are beneficial to himself. As for saving people or meddling in other people's affairs, it is not within his consideration. Many awakened people, including Wei Ying, were shocked by Mu response. The huge power and boundless resources were placed in front of them, but Mu ignored them. This was something they didn't expect. On the contrary, Mu's 3 students didn't care, and there was no fluctuation on their faces. In their opinion, their own lazy teacher only wanted to lie around and die. If he was driven by profit, that would be a miracle. Xiao Hanyan looked at Mu who was still smiling, as if he didn't care about anything. Xiao Hanyan nodded slowly, without any surprise or anger. "Since this is your choice, I respect your idea." She also roughly understood Mu's personality. People with such a laid-back personality are often not so easily driven by others. Since the recruitment failed, there is no need to be hostile to him because of this matter. After all, Mu is still a human being. A simple award ceremony soon came to an end, and most awakened people had joyful smiles on their faces. After all, being able to stand alive in the field means that they have passed the test. But Mu's choice is puzzling to most people. After all, most people will choose to accept such a precious opportunity. No matter in which era, strength is often linked to power. In the training ground, 3 students stood in front of Mu, and Linfeng asked, "Teacher, you rejected Xiao Hanyan's recruitment. Do you plan to continue to be the awakened mentor?" As soon as this was said, Su Wen and Shueqianya also looked up at Mu, their eyes deep. Somehow, they inexplicably didn't want Mu to recruit other disciples. They wanted to be the most outstanding students under Mu. Mu smiled and shook his head at the expectant eyes of the 3 students. "With the example of you 3, how can I have any energy to teach students anymore?" Being a teacher was just a momentary interest for him to have some fun. Now that the interest has passed, he has no energy to be an awakened mentor. Linfeng was quite disappointed, but we still want to continue practicing with the teacher. Mu stretched slowly, the sun shone on his slender body, and smiled. "In this case, are you interested in joining the search team I formed and playing in the ruins occasionally?" Mu also felt that it was a pity to give up the 3 students he had cultivated with all his efforts. The Eternal Night Dynasty still lacks some backbone talents, right? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 159. Compared to the organized teams that are subject to certain control, the search teams spontaneously formed by the awakened are more like ruin hunters living in the city. The awakened collect strategic resources such as food, crystal cores and survivors in the city full of zombies, and distribute merit points according to the corresponding shares after returning to the base. The awakened can use the virtual currency of merit points to exchange equipment at the exchange office to feed themselves. This is the currency model for the awakened in the Yuhei base. Of course, the awakened can also keep the crystal core food obtained from hunting in the city and trade privately with the survivors in the base. The entire base is more like a large exchange with resources. Without openly violating the order, you can get anything you want in the base. In general, the Yuhei base has no restrictions on the awakened. After all, the entire city is just a gathering place for human survivors to survive. Hearing that Mu Qiu wanted to form his own search team, Lin Feng was the first to be excited and his eyes lit up. I want to join. During this period of time, Lin Feng's frequency of losing control has become lower and lower. Now he can control his violent emotions to a certain extent. His dream is to no longer be regarded as a monster by others and become a great hero admired by thousands of people. Shui Qianya, who was wearing a black dress and had a quiet temperament, did not say much, but looked at Mu Qiu and nodded gently. For her, Mu Qiu can make her stronger, which is enough. Old teacher, I want to join too. Su Wen held a brown squirrel in her arms and raised her hand timidly. She hoped to get enough crystal cores to ask the high-tech base to treat her paralyzed father. Joining the law enforcement team naturally has good treatment, but it also means that the resources available are limited. Su Wen also has her own calculations in her mind. She no longer has time to start from the bottom of the law enforcement team, and the law enforcement team has too many controls, which is not what she expected. Although Mu Qiu will put them in the dangerous urban ruins, the resources they can get are also extremely rich. Su Wen believes that she will be able to save a large number of crystal cores to treat her father soon. Mu Qiu nodded without any surprise at the answers of the three students. The so-called formation of a search team was just a medium for him to train students. After all, the structure of the Eternal Night Dynasty in his mind had just begun. The soldiers of the Black Shadow Corps were loyal and devoted. They were Mu Qiu's most loyal servants, but they were just servants. These Black Shadow soldiers were far less flexible than humans in thinking about problems. With limited intelligence, it was difficult for them to come to the surface. This required him to promote another group of subordinates as the commander of the opinions of the Eternal Night Organization. He never worried about the problem of his subordinates' betrayal. He only cared about whether his subordinates' strength could meet the standards. After all, behind him, there were countless warriors of the Black Shadow Kingdom with devouring abilities. Well, he was definitely not thinking about pulling people to help him so that he could make it easier for himself. Then teacher, what should the name of our team be? Lin Feng was very cold to this kind of team similar to the one in the hot-blooded comics. He clenched his fist and said excitedly, why not call it the Linked Yen team? In his mind, the characters in the hot-blooded comics would have a team name similar to this domineering one. Su Wen raised her hand. Then, how about the wind-breaking team? Shui Qianya looked at Mu Qiu, her cold eyes were calm. She is already a mature girl. Mu Qiu chuckled and shook his head, I have already thought of the name of the team. He looked up at the dazzling sun in the sky and slowly said, let's call it Night Owl. Since this world has long been in chaos and has fallen into the abyss of despair, he will be the only king in this dark world. The world enters the eternal night, and I am an owl. Lin Feng and the other two naturally did not understand the special meaning of this name, but they subconsciously felt that this name was very domineering and powerful. At this time, Wei Ying, who had not left yet, came to Mu Qiu with a group of members of the guard team. For Mu Qiu's choice, Wei Ying has recovered from his initial surprise. There are also some powerful awakeners in the base who are tired of the control of the system and choose to kill and survive in the ruins. They are no longer surprised by this. Wei Ying said to Mu Qiu, since you like a leisurely life, we won't force you here. I still have to thank you for saving those trial teams. These are the backbone of the future base. After saying that, Wei Ying suddenly looked solemn, and the guards behind him stood up straight and saluted Mu Qiu in unison. This is the highest etiquette for Wei Ying, who was born in a military family. Suddenly being made such a big scene, several students beside Mu Qiu were shocked. Mu Qiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he stood up that day was because of the voice in his mind. He had no interest in saving those trial teams. Wei Ying put away his actions and turned to Mu Qiu. But, now there is one thing you need to confirm. When he said this, Wei Ying's face suddenly became a little inexplicable, and his eyes looked up and down at Mu Qiu for a moment. What's the matter? Mu Qiu felt quite strange about Wei Ying's reaction. Wei Ying took out the intercom from his waist and said, "Bring her up." As soon as Wei Ying finished speaking, the friction of a series of mechanical gears sounded on the high platform of the stadium, and the transparent elevator that originally connected to the underground training base also rose. Www. Wei Ling, with a ponytail and pretty appearance, walked out of the elevator, with a petite red figure following her. As the two walked in, the red figure also appeared in front of everyone. This is a petite girl wearing a red dress. The girl has a petite figure and a slightly childish face. She looks like she is only a teenager, but she already shows a charming look. Her silky black hair flows down, and her face is as delicate as a porcelain doll. And when the girl's eyes passed through the crowd and landed on Mu Qiu, her eyes suddenly turned red, and there were faint tears in her eyes. After a while, she trotted to Mu Qiu's side, and then the baby swallow threw herself into Mu Qiu's arms like a forest, and said with a cry on her oriole-like mouth, "Brother, Dire finally found you." The girl's cheeks were bright red, her cherry-like mouth was rosy and translucent, and her watery eyes looked at Mu Qiu affectionately, but her eyes were filled with excitement and joy. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 160. The sudden appearance of a girl in a red dress immediately attracted everyone's attention. All the surrounding eyes were focused on Mu Qiu and the girl in his arms. When did this Bing Jun gain a pure-looking younger sister? Wei Ying coughed slightly and explained from the side, this little girl was found by a search team in the ruins of the city. The discovery location was a small gathering place of survivors in the Yellow Zone. It was visually estimated that there were about dozens of survivors in this team, but they all died strangely and tragically in an unfinished building. At that time, the corpses of dozens of awakened people were everywhere, and only this little girl named Qin Mendi survived. At this time Wei Ling spoke. She looked at the girl who threw herself into Mu Qiu's arms and said softly, "After the search team brought Dire back to the base, I happened to be the one to receive her, but Dire's first request was to ask the base to find her long-lost brother named Mu Qiu. I thought of you immediately. After all, there aren't many people named Mu Qiu." When Wei Ying heard this, he also raised his head and looked at Mu Qiu. This girl named Qin Mendi had received so much attention since she mentioned Mu Qiu's name that the base did not even conduct a thorough investigation of the girl's identity. Everyone's attention shifted to Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu felt the curious eyes coming from all directions, lowered her head slightly and saw the girl's cheek pressed against her chest. The girl's weak breath came from her chest. Mu Qiu's eyes showed tenderness. She stroked the girl's silky long hair and said, "Don't be afraid, Dire, brother is right here." Then he looked at Wei Ying with joy. "Thank you for your hard work. This child was separated from me shortly after the end of the world, and now I finally found her." Wei Ying nodded slowly. His words were exactly what the girl said. Wei Ling was quite surprised. "I didn't expect that you have a younger sister. Why have I never heard of you talking about her before?" Mu Qiu smiled, but did not answer. She just looked down at the girl in her arms, and ran her long fingers through the girl's hair. It's like a warm scene of deep love between brother and sister. However, no one saw that the moment Mu Qiu lowered her head, a light flashed in her eyes. The girl, on the other hand, was still hugging Mu Qiu tightly, with a bright red face and a sweet smile of satisfaction on her face. At the same time, in front of the tall wall of Yuhei base. The strong and tall wall is several feet long. The wall is smooth, hard, and thick. The wall is a green iron color, with a faint metallic luster. Outside the wall are the ruins of the city filled with zombie monsters. At the same time, this solid wall is also the last defensive barrier to protect the human survivors inside the wall. Beside the wall, dozens of armed guards were patrolling and guarding. Although the zombies around the base have long been cleared, some zombies still migrate in from time to time. In addition to verifying the survivors who have entered the base, their task is to report possible dangers to the superiors. Usually there is no danger in this job, and some sporadic zombies with low levels will be killed by them with headshots. But today's situation seems to be a little different from usual. The ground began to tremble violently under the feet of the patrolling guards, and the rubble on the ground even began to jump up and down. What do you think that is? One of the guards pointed towards the distance of the road with horrified eyes, and his companions around him also looked hurriedly. I saw tall mecha figures appearing at the end of the asphalt road. There were hundreds of them. These mechas are several feet tall and have a streamlined appearance. They have a sapphire-like energy reactor on their chests. Their entire bodies are covered in solid steel, with only two bright lights shining on their heads. Most of these mechas were gray-black in color, and their casings were covered with hideous scratches and old blood stains. It was hard to imagine how many heavy battles these armors had experienced before. Among the many gray and black mechas, the first white mecha is particularly eye-catching. This white mecha looks slightly different from other ordinary mechas. It has a sharp head, distinct limbs, and its appearance looks much more dexterous. The white mecha was also the fastest. The jet device behind it sprayed out a large ball of fire. In just a few breaths, it galloped from the end of the road to the wall of the Yuhei base. Hundreds of gray and black mechas behind the white mecha also followed closely behind. Looking at the tall mecha that suddenly appeared, the strong smell of gasoline hit their faces, and the guards were stunned for a moment. But these hundreds of mechas just stood quietly in front of them, showing no signs of taking action. In the blink of an eye, someone finally remembered to report the matter and quickly took out the communicator from his waist. At this moment, the space in front of the base wall was distorted, a deep space vortex emerged, and a white figure appeared in front of a group of mechas. Ji Yufeng floated in front, still looking indifferent, looking directly at the white mecha in front of him, and said, "Zilan base." As soon as Ji Yufeng finished speaking, a man's voice sounded from the white mecha. "The white god of death at Yuhei base, I have long admired my name." After saying that, there was a click sound of gears turning, and the cabin on the chest of the white mecha slowly opened. I saw a man wearing a black tight-fitting combat uniform and a helmet, sitting in the cabin inside the mecha. The man jumped up from the cabin, took off his helmet after landing on the ground, and inside was the face of a blond man in his 20s or 30s. The cabins on the chests of the hundreds of gray and black mechas behind the white mechas also opened, and dozens of humans wearing tight-fitting combat uniforms walked out of them. The blond man took out a ball less than the size of a palm, turned on the button on it, and a beam of light flashed after activation. In less than an instant, the white mecha beside him had been captured. The same was true for his companions behind him. In less than a minute, all the mechas in the field had disappeared, leaving only hundreds of humans wearing tight-fitting combat uniforms. Space Storage said. The blond man looked at Ji Yufeng in mid-air and smiled casually, "Sorry, there are more zombies on the road than expected, so I'm late." The light curtain on Ji Yufeng's lenses flashed by, and his voice was indifferent, "Major Xiao has been waiting for a long time."